Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Today, I would like to come back to this issue of what is happening in Zimbabwe regarding the elections, the 2023 elections. SADC, the regional body, and the AU, the continental body, sent election observers to those elections. And the two teams each came with a separate report, and they all condemned those elections as a farce. This is not the first time this has happened. This happened in 2008. And by rejecting the elections then in 2008, Zimbabwe was forced to go into a government of national unity, whose primary purpose was to implement the democratic reforms, which would have stopped this case of rigged elections and bad governance. Alas, no meaningful reforms were implemented during that 2008 to 2013 GNU. Ever since, SADC and the AU have rubber-stamped rigged elections. This year was different. Both SADC and the AU once again turned around and say these elections are a farce. This was giving Zimbabwe another opportunity now to have another GNU and revisit those reforms. That is the important thing here. But it looks like our hopes are going to be dashed because Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of the Republic of South Africa, has decided to downgrade those reports. He is now saying the reports did not condemn the process. The reports only brought up challenges that could happen anyway in the world. And those challenges need to be addressed. In other words, South Africa would like Zimbabwe to be granted, this Zanu PF government to be granted legitimacy. And whatever was raised in the reports would be considered as recommendations that should be addressed in preparation for the next elections. This is not coming out of the blues. ANC, President Cyril Ramaphosa's governing party in South Africa, in November last year, came up with a party resolution saying South Africa will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. To anybody else, that should have come as a shock. Surely, it is for the people of Zimbabwe in a free, fair, and credible election to decide who rules Zimbabwe. If they should decide that Zanu PF should be removed from power, surely it's not for South Africa to say we will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. But they say that boldly. And not only that, they've come back again and again, particularly ANC Secretary General Fikile Balula has reiterated that point again and again, that South Africa will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. Let's rewind back to the time of COVID. This is a video of President Cyril Ramaphosa commenting on some of the events at that time.
I also got some calls from Europe. And the calls were so paternalistic. They were saying, hello, President Ramaphosa. We've heard about this Omicron. I am sorry to tell you that we are banning travel to Europe from South Africa and Southern Africa. No discussion, no attempt to hear what our views are. And I'm saying that the relationship needs to be mutually respectful.
I find that amazing. Here is somebody who is saying Europe should have asked him for his views before they decided to ban flights from South Africa and other Southern African countries to Europe. This was purely a decision. They're not saying South Africa should ban flights. They are banning, they are protecting their own people. This is a decision that an individual country could make. But he is complaining that they should have asked him for his views. They were being disrespectful. They were patronizing him. Paternalistic. I find it very difficult to contrast that with what he's doing. He is now saying South Africa is the one that is going to decide who governs in Zimbabwe. The decision on who governs in Zimbabwe should be based on the democratic will of the people of Zimbabwe. The fact that SADC and the AU have said the process, the election process on the 23rd of August was not democratic. It did not represent the democratic will of the people. His own former colleague, Thabo Mbeki, read the same thing from the same report. And yet, Ramaphosa is ignoring all that. He wants Zanu PF to remain in government in Zimbabwe. He said so. It said so well in advance in November last year. ANC would not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. And now they are deliberately ignoring the SADC and the AU reports to make sure that there is no regime change in Zimbabwe. I find this really outrageous. And for him to be complaining that Europe should have consulted him for his views on whether or not they should ban flights from South Africa to control their own health problems is one of the most outrageous things. Here is somebody who really has no clue what he's doing here. So you seriously want to tell me that South Africa has the right to impose? It's okay for South Africa to impose Zanu PF on the people of Zimbabwe. You don't see that as paternalistic? No, of course not. You don't see that as disrespectful of the people of Zimbabwe? Of course not. Amazing. I can't believe that this is where we are now. Of course, this is more than paternalism. This is more than being disrespectful. This is clear-cut case of state arrogance and terrorism and I don't know. Absolutely amazing. South Africa should know that this is the kind of thing that creates animosities between nations. ANC cannot ride roughshod over the people of Zimbabwe and treat them as if Zimbabwe is nothing more than a province of South Africa. And South Africa decides what happens in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a sovereign nation. The decision on who governs Zimbabwe should be left to the people of Zimbabwe. The people of Zimbabwe have never held free, fair, and credible elections. They've never had a democratic say in the governance of Zimbabwe. This is a historic fact. This is their chance to finally address that point, to implement the democratic reforms and end this nightmare of rigged elections. And for somebody to say, no, you're going to continue to have Zanu PF. We will not allow a regime change in Zimbabwe is the most outrageous thing I can think of. This is really intolerable. This is unacceptable. South Africa must know that what the ANC government is doing is unacceptable. And history will go down as this is South Africa playing the big bully, no different from what Russia is doing with Ukraine, deciding on what Zimbabweans should do. No. There cannot be any doubt at all that the SADC report clearly stated that the 23rd August election was a farce. The Zanu PF regime is illegitimate. And South Africa, the ANC government, is trying to reverse that. The consequences are, if Zanu PF is declared legitimate, is that the people of Zimbabwe will be stuck with this regime for another 5 years, with all the economic, social, and political consequences that goes with this continued failed state. Zimbabwe is a failed state. And the primary reason for it is that for the last 43 years, the country has failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And for somebody to try to pretend that those elections were free, fair, and credible, particularly a country that has held itself free, fair, and credible elections, is an insult. And it must be denounced. And I really would like South Africans to realize the consequences of what this ANC government is doing. No doubt, once they have installed the Zanu PF dictatorship in Harare, there's no doubt in my mind that the ANC government is going to tighten the rules to stop Zimbabweans leaving Zimbabwe to go to South Africa. And those who are in South Africa, to force them back to Zimbabwe. So South Africa is imposing this failed state on Zimbabwe and then turning around and punishing the people for its own arrogant mistakes, for its own terrorist activities, because this is state terror. South Africa should not be abusing its dominance as the dominant country in the SADC region to bully the region into rejecting the SADC report. The SADC report is clear and unambiguous. The 23rd August elections were flawed and illegal, and they could not possibly produce a legitimate government. Please do not abuse your position as a dominant country in the SADC region for your own stated, well in advance position that you would not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. South Africa has absolutely no right to decide who rules Zimbabwe. It should be left to the democratic will of the people of Zimbabwe. That democratic will was denied. That is a fact. And South Africa should not try to change the historic facts. President Cyril Ramaphosa has got his own problems in South Africa. ANC has got their own problems in South Africa. South Africa is fast becoming another failed African nation. And that incompetence of the ANC government is now being exported to the neighboring countries to prop up their own position. That is totally unacceptable. And we would like to state it unambiguously that South Africa's hypocrisy cannot be allowed to go unchallenged. It's making a mountain out of a molehill that Europe banned flights from Southern Africa to control COVID. And yet he is the one who is imposing a dictator in another country, saying South Africa will not allow regime change. Who are you? You know that Zanu PF rigged these elections. And now you still want to impose Zanu PF on the people of Zimbabwe. Who are you? I would like to restate this point. If Zanu PF, if ANC succeeds in imposing Zanu PF on the people of Zimbabwe, this is the sort of thing that will take generations to be forgotten and forgiven, if at all. The people of South Africa must be aware of what ANC is doing. The people of South Africa must be aware of the consequences of what ANC is doing. And I think the people of Zimbabwe should stand up and make their voices heard. This madness by this ANC regime in South Africa must be stopped. Zimbabwe cannot afford another 5 years of this corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship. That is a fact. Ramaphosa is trying to change all that. Ramaphosa does not have the right to rewrite the SADC Election Observer Mission report. That is a fact. And South Africa must know that if it does that, this is one case that will not go unnoticed. We cannot accept this. The sheer hypocrisy of always complaining about Europe has done this, and yet in your own backyard, you completely disregard the rules. You completely ignore the people's pleas. You completely ignore the suffering of other people just because you are the dominant country. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. Ramaphosa and ANC must not be allowed to change the SADC Election Observer Mission report. It condemned the 23rd August 2023 Zimbabwean elections as a farce. This Zanu PF regime is illegitimate. That is fact. And South Africa and President Cyril Ramaphosa must not be allowed to change that. Thank you and good night.